Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Beat. This is Brooke, Cary, your host, and today we have a special feature conversation on immigration law and deaf refugees seeking asylum here in Riverside. Last week I had the opportunity to interview Miss Hadley Bajramovic, an immigration lawyer who has found a group of 300 plus refugees and is working to help them seek asylum in the United States.
Hi, I'm Hadley Bajramovic. I'm an immigration attorney in Riverside, California, and I'm here today to talk about some of the cases that we've been working on for the past 5 years with undocumented deaf immigrants.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Hadley. So, how did you get into immigration law in the first place?
I think it was part of my growing up experience. I lived in Prague, Czech Republic, and it was during the Bosnian War. And there were refugees coming in from that conflict, and trying to provide support systems to them, I realized the plight of the refugee. And so when I went back to school, I was actually in my 30s and knew at that time that I was going to do immigration law. I mean, I started with my bachelor's at 30 and graduated from law school when I was 39.
Wow.
So, or 37, I can't remember.
Wow, okay.
But anyway, I knew that I wanted to do immigration law. I did a clerkship in an immigration law firm in Memphis, Tennessee, and came out to Riverside to work in a university, and then I started a private practice.
Okay. Did you have contact with any of the refugees in the Czech Republic?
I married one.
Oh, wow, that is contact.
Hence the last name, Bajramovic.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sure that influenced your heart towards the refugees.
Yes.
Yeah, in general.
Yes.
And when did you start, is that when you started hearing a lot of the stories of just how desperate some of these people are?
Right. Then I found out how cruel the world can be. I mean, we have problems in our society, of course, in the U.S., but when you hear the mass levels of persecution that happen in the face of genocide, which is what was happening in Bosnia at that time, you almost can't comprehend it. It's just horrific. And when I came here to Riverside and I started hearing the stories about the death persecution, it was remarkably similar to what had happened in Bosnia without the political conflict. So let's talk a little bit about the deaf refugees in Riverside.
Have you found that there are a large population here in Riverside?
Yes. We call them either irregular status or undocumented foreign nationals, depending on their country that they're from. They come to the Riverside area and to Southern California because of the availability of schools and education for the deaf. In Riverside, we have California School for the Deaf, Riverside. So many of my clients have children in that school. And from there, they'll go on to Northridge or another program. Plus, I think that the sign language programs that are offered in the schools in this area are pretty sophisticated. And so that's why we have such a large population here. The number of people that I represent is around 300, which is a lot to have with a low incidence type of circumstance like deafness.
So where are these people coming from?
They're coming from Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Colombia, and I have a smattering of respondents that are from other continents like Africa, and we actually have a new client from Croatia.
Wow.
So anywhere, I guess, where it's not a highly developed country, there's some sort of stigma or societal rejection of deaf people, and it becomes tantamount to persecution.
So can you tell me, I mean, you've won 4 cases so far, and each case takes about 5 years. Is that right?
They take yes, because we have an asylum law. There's a rule, we call it the 1-year rule. And these cases take longer for several reasons, but mainly because most of my clients have been here for 20 years or more. And under asylum law, one is expected to declare asylum within their first year becoming out of status or entering the U.S. Undocumented. My clients did not do that. They did not know about this rule. They did not know about asylum. In fact, they didn't understand that they were persecuted. So the asylum office, which holds the first interview with an asylum applicant, cannot adjudicate the case normally when there's a 1-year rule problem, so the case goes to court. We have been successful in establishing that there are exceptional circumstances for our clients, and those 4 cases that you're mentioning were adjudicated by the asylum office. We were able to show that because of the unique nature of deafness, that the 1-year rule cannot be applied to these cases. But it did take time for them to, the asylum office, to accept and agree to that.
So what you're saying then is that generally there's a limit. You can only work the case essentially for a year.
Well, an individual, for example, let's just say from Syria, that individual, we're here as a student. From the point that student is no longer allowed to be in the U.S., from that point, they have 1 year to declare asylum. Okay, and it's sort of like the government's way of cutting off their liability to accept a refugee. So they're saying, if you don't declare in the first year, then we're not going to give you asylum.
Has that caused problems for you?
Well, it makes the cases more difficult, and it limits the type of relief that we can eventually get for that person. So they're still eligible to stay in the U.S. and get work authorization, but they're not eligible for asylum. And the reason why we want asylum is because it's a path to a lawful permanent residence. So when an individual is held asylum for 1 year, that individual is allowed to apply for a green card and then eventually citizenship.
Interesting, okay. So your first case, tell me a little bit about that, and how did you get approached with the whole situation? Was it the first time you had heard of a deaf refugee?
I honestly, that was the first time I'd ever encountered a deaf person.
Wow.
I was at an immigration rally, or it was more of a group to talk about the impact of immigration problems on the Riverside area. And there was an individual there that approached me at the end. His name was Hector, or is Hector. And he was writing very broken English on a paper towel, asking if he could come to see me. And my assistant back in those days informed me on our drive home, if you're going to have Hector in your office, then you have to get a sign language interpreter. And I was like, well, how am I going to do that? I don't know any sign language interpreters. Can we find another way? And she said, nope, that's the law. And so I looked it up, and she was right. It is the law. I mean, very clearly states I have to provide reasonable means of communication. And she said, but our friend Kathy is a sign language interpreter. And I said, no, I did not know that. And it turns out that Kathy is much more than a sign language interpreter. She's just an amazing mix of sign language interpreter and CDI, even though she's not deaf. She has this incredible connection to people who are deaf and can really communicate effectively.
You got really lucky with that connection.
I sure did, because I don't know that we would have been able to gain the trust of Hector and then all the people after him without Kathy. Plus, I think she's been in the community for a while, and some of them recognized her. She was she was in the dorm at California School for the Deaf as a RA,
right.
And so she's a CODA. No, she's a SODA, right? It's she's a sibling of a deaf. Yes, and that's how she developed her talent.
Okay. So did you have any idea of how difficult it was going to be to work Hector's case?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't think we had a case because we did a little bit of research. We called a couple of agencies in Mexico, and we called the consulate and said, well, we're probably going to represent a deaf individual who's a Mexican national. Are there protections for deaf people in Mexico? And the response was, of course there are. There's no problem in Mexico. No, we take care of the deaf, and we have schools for the deaf, and we have access to interpreters. And I thought, okay, so that's a dead end. And I looked at his history, and I couldn't find anything. And then I said, well, I called and I found out that we're not going to get a lot of research to support that you have fear of going back. He said, oh, well, that's really too bad, because if I have to go back, I don't want my children to suffer what I suffered. And then I realized that maybe there's something more to this, and he started telling stories. And then his wife started telling us stories. And then his wife has a bunch of sisters, all of them deaf, telling a story. Yes. So I'm not an expert on the causes of deafness, but there's something congenital in certain cases. And there's a big difference in the way our case goes if somebody was born deaf or if somebody became deaf later in life.
Really?
Yes. So this particular family were all born deaf, which meant that they communicated very well with each other. They had always been able to communicate, to use sign language, and if they were using home signs, they were really advanced, sophisticated home signs. So they were telling us things about, like one story that sticks out in my mind, how the girls, sisters, young, were forced off a bus, and some men urinated on their backs. And when I heard that story, that's when I knew that we had to dig deeper. And the stories that I've heard are so upsetting that they've caused me sometimes to have almost kind of a post-traumatic stress, of my own, just watching the person express the story, because sign language is so expressive.
Yeah.
So, when they're saying, like, I'm afraid, and their whole face changes, it's like reliving the whole experience with them. And their ability to communicate like that also makes them very credible. And so when we went to our first asylum interview, I think the asylum officer was shocked also, and had to kind of go through that same thing that I went through, where I knew nothing to understanding, oh my God, there's a real problem here, because they tell their stories so effectively. And we found patterns of rape, physical abuse, imprisonment by family members, beatings, starvation, just horrible things that happen to these people.
Wow. So that's a lot. How, just on a personal level, how have you handled that? Like, in just the constant hearing of these atrocities and these stories where people just are so desperate and so abused. How, just personally, how do you find hope through that?
I think through them, because they've been through these horrible things. I mean, I'm not sure I could have survived some of the things that they went through, and yet they're so happy and they're so at peace, and they are full of hope, so much hope. And I think I've learned a lesson from them. I might be upset because I missed my television show or something, get really annoyed, but then I think about what they go through, and they can still maintain such a good and happy attitude. It's something that we all can learn from, and I think that everybody who's worked with them in my office and the courts everywhere, they've all come out of it with that same feeling.
Not to take small things for granted.
It's that also in seeing that it's just a message of hope, that if the whatever has given, what's the source of the hope of these people, it's incredible. And just amazing that they come through these horrible experiences, so normal, just trying to do the right thing for their children and to prevent the same things from happening to their children, and wanting very badly to work. And since we started these cases, they're all have working permission, and they're here, on the radar, and they're complying with everything that they're supposed to do. And they're all working in different places, and they work very hard. They're great employees. The people that have employed them have thanked us for bringing them to them, and that's another part of what we've been doing with these cases is help them find jobs, help them know about banking, buying property, just basic social wealth of understanding how things work. They don't have it. So
is that like part of your services that you offer to them, or is it something
informally.
that you do on the
informally.
side?
And it's mainly Kathy who does that. She meets a group at the library to help them fill out job applications. Now, there's so many things about what deaf people go through that I couldn't possibly tell you whatever half hour we have, but they can't read or write. They were taught how to write their names. So if you were to ask one of my clients, do you know how to write? They would say yes. And you would assume that they could write a paragraph, but they cannot. So Kathy has to meet them in different places and fill out their job applications for them. She's been to their DMV appointments, had to go to the Social Security office with them, and she does this all volunteer. And so we're sort of like an informal immigration law office doing all these services, but we don't mind. And if it got any bigger, we would have to find another way to provide the services. But so far, we've been able to handle it.
Have you received calls from other lawyers, other immigration lawyers in other places?
Every week. We had an article published in Voice, which is the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Because of that article, it comes up obviously when people are researching asylum for the deaf. So there are deaf people all across the country, obviously, who are undocumented, and the lawyers reach out to me, and I usually give them everything I've got, because it's in everybody's best interest to win and to establish this and have it be precedent.
Right. Now, for your first case, before you had won the case, leading up to that point, what were some of your fears? How was your confidence, and what were some of your thought processes during that whole period?
I thought that I would do everything within my power to prevent them from ever being harmed by putting themselves out there for the government to know that they're there. I knew that it was going to get hard, and I would just do everything, and that's all they wanted to see, was that somebody was really willing to, put themselves, like, throw myself in front of a Mack truck. That's how I usually describe it, to make sure that nothing happened to them, to harm them. And it was really scary, because this has happened in the past where people declare asylum and go into removal proceedings, and then they're ordered removed. And there was a lot of fraud, and it still happens, where people who are not licensed to practice law or who are practicing unethically will put people into the asylum process so they can have working authorization, and then eventually when they get to a judge, because they don't really have an asylum claim, are ordered removed. That was my greatest fear. And so for me, the only way to prevent that was to be very prepared. So we did research. I had so many people working on the research. I went to UCR, the sociology department, and they performed a study and were able to use their methods to show that there's persecution. And that study is published, and we will get you that contact information for that person who did that study. And we went to visit Dr. Rachel Mayberry at UC San Diego. She has a very large operation on campus where there are studies performed on people who are deaf and who have had certain types of access to education and language and that's going back to whether you're born deaf or learn or become deaf later in life. Because if you don't have language early in your life, it has effects on your cognitive abilities later. It's not an intelligence effect. It's just a way that an individual perceives things is drastically altered, and I think it affects memory as well. So
in what ways?
This is Dr. Rachel Mayberry's research, but if you don't have language at a certain point, it makes it difficult to remember events in early childhood.
Wow.
We referred to her work quite a bit in our legal briefs.
Okay.
And that helped us to get around that 1 year rule.
Right.
Because we're trying to show that it's not a lack of competence, but they couldn't be held to the same standard if they grew up in certain conditions that prevented them from having.
See. Yeah, and that's pivotal, I'm sure, in moving forward with the case.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, and it's also part of the persecution.
Yeah.
So we really did our homework, and we were able to find a few scholarly articles that were published in Mexico on the societal stigma against deaf people, and found that there is a problem with people thinking that having a deaf child is punishment from God, and there's forced oralism where the parents will try to make the children speak, and some of the techniques are really horrific, like sticking a bird in the mouth of the child, a live bird was one of them, beating if they were, and this was another pattern I saw in all my clients. If they were in school, which was rare, they would be beaten if they used sign language, because the point of having them in regular school with regular children was to trick them into actually talking, and it would be frustrating for everyone, and there would be no interpreter.
Wow. So these people have, suffered just immensely, and come to the United States seeking hope, seeking a new life. And where do we find some of those people today?
Well, my clients went from being right there in that same state as when they arrived in the early 90s, or if they arrived in the last decade, still struggling and trying to figure out what to do. And they all know each other or find each other, as everybody does in their social groups, and we're supporting each other through life. And some of them probably just a little bit more confident, were able to go out and find odd jobs. But nobody, any of my clients had a normal job, a regular job. They were just scraping by. And then when we started to make the asylum claims, part of the claim allows, or the process allows that individual to get work authorization. So when my clients started to get work authorization, and when we went out there and found jobs, for example, there's a plastics factory that we were able to develop a relationship with, and they hired a lot of our clients, Walgreens, Goodwill. It changed their lives completely. So now they have new problems, which are good problems, like how to write a check, or just all the things that we kind of find out when we become 18 years old. Oh, no, now I need to run my life. And so we every year have had a big event at California Baptist University called the LEAD event.
Okay.
And we have speakers come in. One year, Congressman Mark Takano came in and heard all their grievances and their daily problems. He was so enlightened by it. Didn't have any idea of kind of the common, ordinary daily plight of a deaf individual. We have bankers come in and people who work with like covered California health insurance, just giving them access to these agencies and kind of getting them up to speed on, okay, well, now that you're here in a regular status, this is what you need to do to be a good member of our society. And they are so happy and they love it and they do it. And
when is that event?
We have it at different times of the year every year, and it's never consistently at the same time.
Okay,
but
it's advertised somehow?
We don't advertise it except for on our Facebook because it's for our clients.
Okay.
And we reach out to the people who want a table or the providers to be there as well, like Purple Video Relay, like Sorensen, Wells Fargo,
Okay.
just in different advocacy groups.
Yeah.
Will show up.
Okay. What are some of the specific stories that have stood out to you in just this past year or 2 years?
You know, I have this like conceptual memory, so I don't remember details as well as other people do. But
Okay.
I think one of the stories that affected me the most was from a gentleman from El Salvador, and he and his brother are both deaf, and they were kidnapped in El Salvador, and the kidnapper took them deep into a forest, and in the campsite there were a lot of other children, and all of them were deaf, and they were all forced to sit and watch brutality such as cutting off the hands of the children so they couldn't communicate, or putting their hands into the fire. And this particular client said that there was a woman there that took it upon herself to take him and his brother out of the camp, snuck them out, and told them to run, and they got out. And, you know, I really can't even bring back all the memories of that statement because it's so horrifying what he told us, because he explained everything in detail. And another one was from one of our clients whose father locked her in an apartment and would leave her for 2 weeks or a month at a time with, you know, just a little bit of food, and then she'd run out of food. And the description of her beating on the door, the windows, trying to tell people to help her, and they would look at her and see her beating on the windows, and they would see a child, and they thought she was just a unruly, you know, child being punished. Nobody would help her. So by the time he would come back to just check on her, I'm not sure, that's what she said it was, she'd be starved, and then he would give her some more food and then leave again for another month. And it's just that was a very regular pattern in these cases. Also a lot of sexual abuse in the schools because the teachers know that they can't tell, and they scare them. And if, you know, you tell anybody that she's gonna, like, signs like that, that would be the slit the throat sign. Mm-hmm. So these are the reason why I know these is because these are the ones that I use as examples, but they're patterns that exist with most of my clients. Mm-hmm. So the sexual molestation is in just about 90%.
Of the deaf
of the
cases?
clients, yes.
Wow. How long have these people been in the United States typically before they come to you?
Probably the average is about 10 years.
10 years.
Yes.
Okay. And have they sought help before coming to you?
Yes. Some had already been to attorneys that told them they could do nothing for them, and that was because the death asylum claim had not been tried. I did find one case with a woman from Thailand. The judge found that it was not persecution in that case because it was sort of a similar pattern of the child was staying at home all day and cleaning the house and wasn't given the right to leave the home and wasn't allowed to have a driver's license. And in that case, the judge focused on the driver's license and said the driver's license access is not a right, it's a privilege. And so he denied that asylum case. So I think a lot of attorneys looked at that case and thought, I'm not going to try it. It's not available. And I listened to, probably 10 cases before I realized that this needed to be done again. And we didn't actually file until we had that body of information. And also I saw it as a kind of a class that was building, that if they had 300 people, very credible statement saying the same thing, it couldn't be ignored. Mm-hmm. So when we went to court, after we did a round of asylum interviews, we went to court, and the judge that day came out, and I was sitting in the gallery with all my clients, and he saw their faces, and he said to me, "Wow, counselor, I didn't expect this." Mm-hmm. And just
how many did you bring with you?
They normally put about 30 cases on the docket, so we had about 60 people in there. Family, some had their spouses with them, and they just were so incredibly confident and happy and thankful that they were having their time in front of a judge, and that just was that was there in their face, and the judge saw it immediately.
Wow.
So anyway,
yeah,
that's a really good memory. That was a good day.
Yeah, sounds like it. And have you been able to keep in touch with some of those people?
All of them.
All of them?
All of them.
Wow.
We still, because we do the lead event, mm-hmm. whenever they're experiencing any kind of problems, they reach out to us. And it can be any kind of problem. Mm-hmm. We try to keep Monday as what we call a Deaf Day. Kathy is now on staff here. And
okay.
So she comes in on Mondays, mm-hmm. and that's when our clients, so they can walk in if they had just any kind of a question like, where do I change my tire? I mean, just basic stuff.
Yeah.
And they're very respectful. Sometimes something that could take a hearing client 10 minutes takes 2 hours mm-hmm. with our deaf clients. But, at the end of the day, it's worth it to invest time in them.
Yeah. Have you seen, and I mean, obviously that's not the most efficient way of doing things, but it's, necessary. How do you and your staff view that? You guys seem pretty willing to put the extra time in.
It's definitely about willingness.
Yeah.
And every now and then I have to inform my colleagues of their duty to provide an interpreter. Mm-hmm. But we do look for ways to make it more efficient, and we've gotten better ourselves too. I mean, we'll continue to try to improve. One thing, we've tried to improve our technology, but now FaceTime handles.
Yeah.
We were going to get.
Thank God for FaceTime.
Yes. And I think that we've all gotten better, and we've had to use the group sort of as a microphone and identify who the leaders are to keep all the information correct, because with all of my clients there's a grapevine and people misinform one another, and misinformation can spread like wildfire. So for us it's about informing all the time our clients, and so we've kind of figured out systems to keep everybody informed without coming into the office.
What kind of?
For example, there was a new relief that President Obama, this administration, announced in 2012. We call it DACA, and it's for childhood arrivals that had no choice when they were brought to the U.S. undocumented. And we had many of our deaf individuals that were eligible, or their children were eligible.
Oh, I see.
So anytime we have that kind of a change, we need to inform them. And so we bring in a group of leaders and we inform them, and then we have a bigger kind of town hall session. But just to keep all of the misunderstandings in control, or to limit them, we work with the leaders first. And Hector, who you saw on stage, is one of them.
Yeah, who are the leaders?
Hector Figueroa, and he is a hero. He's the one that would not give up. There's another Hector Reina, and then there's Martin Tapia, Lourdes Iniguez. They're just, I don't think I can remember all of them sitting right here.
Yeah.
Just sort of like a round table group of undocumented who are now documented.
Do they have contact with the other clients of yours, and that's kind of how you?
Yes. Because my
so it's a whole community essentially.
It's a community, and the best way to get information to them is through Facebook. Okay. So when we also want to put something out very quickly, we do a Facebook video.
Do you find that is possibly related to the memory and later language acquisition?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. We have to
it on
explain
paper or like in words typed out.
Right, because we're trying to explain very complex immigration ideas,
Yeah.
and that's why 10 minutes can be 2 hours, because of trying to go back and then we find examples that'll work.
Wow. So even explaining the law,
Right.
and the way that law works
It's
to
even
them.
more than that. It's like, when did you come into the U.S.? Let me think. And then Kathy will have to say, was it before the planes flew into the towers?
Whoa.
That's the kind of work we have to do to get information.
Okay.
Um,
So they don't have concepts of what year it was or.
Very often not. And it's, related to whether or not they had language, the education. My clients that are hearing that are from certain countries normally only get up to the 6th grade. So with our deaf individuals, they're not even getting 6th grade. They're getting more or less like maybe they saw Sesame Street a few times kind of education. And that also affects their memory and their ability to understand what we're talking about. And one of the problems we're having lately is that our clients will go to advocates who know and experienced these people are sometimes exploited or manipulated. And they're trying to prevent me sometimes from manipulating them, but they don't understand that's not what I'm doing. Okay, so I get often I get pushback from community advocates.
Interesting. So sometimes they come and they're just a little suspicious already.
Right.
Yeah, which reasonable.
Yes, and the children of my clients who are older and are hearing, they'll call me and they'll be like, what are you doing with my mom? And I'll have to earn their trust.
Wow.
The community advocates, I can normally just explain what we're doing and they're okay. But the immigration process that we're doing, it changes. There's so many steps. So keeping the community advocates apprised of 300 cases going through this is really challenging.
So wow, that sounds like quite a task. So how many people do you have working on this deaf refugee? Is it just you or?
Oh no, I mean it's the entire office.
Okay.
We've all had our time working with it in one way. For example, Nina's representing them in court now. I do the initial consultation and explanations because we want to make sure when they decide to go through the process they really understand it. Everybody here has written a brief for it or worked on one case or the other.
Okay.
The whole office is invested.
Wow. Are there other offices like this anywhere in the U.S.?
Not to my knowledge. No, I think we're it.
Have you received clients from other states?
Oh, yes. We do. And that means that we often have to go to those states to attend their interviews or their court hearings. So Virginia, D.C., New York, Texas, a lot in Texas, all over.
Yeah, that makes sense because of Cuba and those other countries.
Well, a lot of them were trafficked.
Oh.
So they were brought in to peddle for, criminals.
Right.
The peddling rings. If you do a Google search on 1997 deaf peddling ring, you will find the major bust of an apartment that had way too many people living in it, and they were all peddling for one, head of the ring. And so it was busted, and we actually have one of my favorites. She was one of the people that was released from that imprisonment.
Wow.
And instead of giving any kind of immigration relief, they gave her a voluntary departure and put her on a plane and sent her back to Mexico. But she came back in, but she was granted asylum about a year ago.
Wow.
So we told her story.
That's great. So as the refugees that come to you, I'm sure, a lot of them are impoverished in their home countries, and then coming to the United States, they lose a lot of those resources.
That's true.
How do they handle the cost of law services, and how does that impact you?
That we had to subsidize, well, we didn't subsidize, we just cut our rates, like dramatically. We still do that. The deaf clients do pay us. We had to set up like deferment, like we're going to go ahead and do the work, and when you start working, then you can start making us like monthly payments according to your ability to pay. And this is one of the amazing things about these people. They didn't want me to work for them for free, and they insisted on going out and doing things to collect money, and I didn't expect them to do that, but they did. They didn't want to be getting something for free that they don't have that kind of entitlement. They want to contribute, and they want to prove that they can do it. So, this is, I think, my 6th year of working on these cases, and it's still the same. And we try to keep the costs as low as possible and manageable. And today I met with, I'm on a board of, I don't think I can officially announce it yet, but we're going to start working on setting up a fund for defense of...
A government fund?
No, our own, like
okay.
Maybe a nonprofit type fund. And I don't know exactly how it'll work yet, but we would like to have funds for children in removal proceedings and for the deaf.
Is that something that your office is working on, or
Yes, we're going to start working on it. Okay. And also to get other lawyers into the project so that we want a group of people that are willing to cut their rates and offer their services to this project or fund. Mm-hmm. And there are different ways we could work that out.
Yeah. Now you said you have to cut dramatically. I understand that. How dramatically?
Well, our normal cases cost probably 3 times more. I mean, the amount of money that we request for that type of representation. Mm-hmm. So just to give you an idea how much work it is, there's a briefing process to file the asylum claim in the first place. So that's a lot of intense preparation in lawyer hours. And then once we go into an asylum interview, we have all day in the asylum office. And once the asylum office refers it to court, it can last 3, 4, 5 years in court with 3 or 4 appearances a year, filing very intense applications for relief that are 5 inches thick with evidence and explanations. So the amount of hours that we put in for one person is probably close to 100 hours over the course of the representation. Mm-hmm. So if you were to look at that from the point of view of if I were to use my hourly rate of $275, mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking, $27,000 worth of representation. Mm-hmm. And we do our best. And I know because my clients who are deaf do their best to make some kind of long-term payment plan that they can afford, mm-hmm. and doesn't cause them to go hungry or not pay bills or something of that nature.
To feel hopeless in the place where they are seeking hope.
Right. Exactly. And they've all paid some lawyer somewhere a couple $1,000, or a notario, somebody who doesn't have the right to practice law, and lost their money and have been defrauded. And it's important to me that we continue that to not also keep trust in the community. Awesome. Because if I don't have their trust, it's really hard to represent them.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Hadley. It was great having you out here with us.
Thank you.
Next week, stay tuned for our Tuesday News podcast. We'll be updating you on news over this past week, sports, and arts and entertainment. See you next time.